Chapter 1, The Substitute Bride. The candlelight flickered, casting trembling shadows on the cold stone walls of the Voss family's mansion. Lila stood in the corner, her linen dress clinging to her thin shoulders as she listened to the heated argument in the main hall. "Alara, you must marry Cale Vorn. The Emperor's order is absolute. If the Vorn family is exiled, someone from our family must accompany him. It's our duty." Lord Voss's voice boomed, heavy with urgency. Alara, the Voss family's beloved daughter, screamed and threw a porcelain vase to the ground. "Duty? Father, are you crazy? Cale's entire family is accused of treason. They're being sent to the frozen wastelands in the north. I'd rather die than marry that traitor's son and rot in exile." Lady Voss burst into tears, clinging to Alara's arm. "My poor child, but what can we do? If we defy the Emperor, our entire family will be ruined." The room fell into a tense silence, thick enough to cut with a knife. The candlelight flickered, casting the Voss family's anxious faces in sharp relief. Lila's hands tightened slightly at her sides. She had been a maid in the Voss mansion since she was 8, left on their doorstep after her mother's death. Lord Voss had been kind enough to take her in, but kindness was never equality. She slept in the cramped attic, ate at the servants' table, and spent her days mending clothes or scrubbing floors, always on the fringes, never truly belonging. Now, as she listened to Alara's screams and Lady Voss's sobs, a faint spark of hope ignited in her chest. This was her chance to escape the endless cycle of servitude. She took a deep breath, her bare feet pressing firmly against the cold stone floor, and stepped forward into the center of the room. "My lord, my lady," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her heart, "I will go. I will marry Cale Vorn and accompany him into exile." Everyone turned to stare at her. Alara's eyes widened with shock, then relief. Lord Voss frowned. "Lila, this is no joke. Exile is not a punishment for a maid. It's a death sentence. The journey alone is full of dangers, and the wastelands are uninhabitable." Lord and Lady Voss exchanged a glance, relief overriding their hesitation. They had no other choice. Within 3 days, Lila was dressed in a simple red wedding gown, borrowed from Alara, the fabric scratchy against her skin, the hem too long for her shorter frame. The ceremony was hasty, conducted in the dimly lit chapel of the mansion, with only the Voss family and a priest present. Alara avoided her gaze entirely, while Lord and Lady Voss muttered quick, distracted blessings. Lila didn't even see her husband's face clearly. He was brought in by 2 guards, his hands bound with iron chains, his head bowed, his dark hair falling like a curtain to hide his features. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Cale didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't even glance in her direction. He was led away immediately, back to the cell where he'd been held since his family's arrest. Lord and Lady Voss exchanged a glance. They had no other choice. Within 3 days, Lila was dressed in a simple red wedding gown, borrowed from Alara, and married Cale Vorn in a hasty ceremony. She didn't even see her husband's face clearly. He was brought in chains, his head bowed, his dark hair covering his eyes. The next morning, the exiled group set off. Lila stood in a rickety wooden cart, wrapped in a thick fur coat, another gift from the Voss family, though it was clearly old and worn. Cale walked beside the cart, his hands bound with iron chains, his feet shackled. He said nothing to her, not even a word of greeting. The other exiles were a ragtag group, elderly grandparents, young children, and other relatives of the Vorn family. Most of them glared at Lila, blaming her for being willing to marry into their disgraced family. A woman with a sharp face spat at her feet. "You little opportunist! You think marrying Cale will give you some status? Wait until we reach the wastelands. You'll regret it." Lila said nothing. She just pulled the fur coat tighter around herself and stared ahead. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She was free from the Voss mansion, free from being a nobody. That was enough for now. The journey was brutal, a relentless march through mud and cold. The roads were rutted and uneven, jostling the wooden carts so violently that Lila's bones ached. Food was scarce, usually a handful of hard, moldy bread per person each day, and water was often stagnant, leaving many of the exiles with stomach aches. The guards accompanying them were cruel, their tempers short, and they took every opportunity to bully the weakened group. They beat the elderly when they fell behind, stole the meager blankets from the children, and leered at the women. On the fifth day, a young boy named Milo, no older than 6, with matted brown hair and a thin frame, fell ill with a high fever. His mother, Mara, a haggard woman with sunken eyes, knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face as she begged the guards for medicine. "Please," she sobbed, clutching the guard's boot. "He's just a child. A little medicine, that's all I ask." The guard sneered, kicking her hard in the ribs. Mara fell back with a cry, gasping for air. "Medicine? You traitors don't deserve even a drop of water," he spat. "If the brat dies, good riddance, one less traitor to feed." Lila couldn't stand it. Her hands curled into fists, and before she could think, she was climbing down from the cart. She rummaged through the small leather bag slung over her shoulder, her only possession, containing a few articles of clothing and a pouch of dried herbs her mother had taught her to gather and preserve before she died. She knelt beside Milo, whose skin was burning hot to the touch, his breathing shallow and rapid. She crushed a handful of feverfew and yarrow into a paste, mixed it with a drop of her own water, and gently applied it to his forehead and the back of his neck. Then she took out the only piece of unspoiled bread she had saved, tore it into tiny pieces, and soaked it in water to make a soft gruel, feeding it to him spoonful by spoonful. Lila couldn't stand it. She rummaged through the small bag of belongings she had brought, some dried herbs her mother had taught her to use before she died. She knelt beside the boy, crushed the herbs into a paste, and applied it to his forehead. Then she took out the only piece of bread she had saved and soaked it in water to feed him. "What are you doing?" Cale's voice suddenly sounded above her. She looked up and finally saw his face clearly. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes as dark as night. There was no emotion in his gaze, just cold indifference. "He's sick," Lila said simply. "I'm trying to help him." "What are you doing?" Cale's voice suddenly sounded above her, low and gravelly. She looked up, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes as dark as night, flecked with gold. There was no emotion in his gaze, just cold indifference. But there was also a faint furrow between his brows, as if he couldn't understand why she would risk herself for a stranger. "He's sick," Lila said simply, not looking away from his eyes. "I'm trying to help him." Cale stared at her for a long moment, his chained hands hanging at his sides. Then he turned to the guard who had kicked Mara, his voice low but carrying a weight that made the guard flinch. "Give her some water, now." The guard hesitated, his face reddening with anger, but something in Cale's gaze, something fierce and commanding, made him back down. He sneered, unslung his canteen, and tossed it to Lila. "Here, don't waste it on the little traitor." Lila caught the canteen, ignoring his insult, and poured a small amount of water into her palm, wetting Milo's lips. She nodded her thanks to Cale, who just turned away, resuming his position beside the cart, but she noticed that for the rest of the day, he kept a silent watch over her and the boy. That night, the boy's fever broke. His mother knelt before Lila, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Lady Lila. You saved my son's life." The other exiles looked at Lila with newfound respect. Even Cale, who had been silent all day, spoke to her again. "Where did you learn to heal?" he asked. "My mother was a healer," Lila replied. "She taught me before she died." Cale said nothing more, but from that day on, he would often share his rations with her, and when the guards tried to harass her, he would step in silently, his cold gaze making the guards back off. Lila didn't understand why he was helping her. They were strangers, bound only by a forced marriage, but she was grateful. Chapter 2. Survival in the Wasteland. After a month of endless marching, they finally reached the northern wastelands. The air hit them like a fist, cold enough to burn their lungs, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of snow and ice, stretching as far as the eye could see. There were no trees, no houses, no signs of life, just a vast, desolate expanse of white. The guards unloaded a few tattered tents, a handful of rusty tools, and a small sack of grain, then mounted their horses and rode away, leaving them to fend for themselves. The sound of their hooves faded into the distance, leaving only the howl of the wind. "We're going to die here," a man wailed. "There's no food, no shelter, nothing." Panic spread through the group. People started arguing, fighting over the little food they had. Lila took a deep breath and walked to the center of the group. "Everyone, Calm down, she said loudly. Fighting won't help. We need to work together if we want to survive. A man scoffed. What do you know, girl? You're just a maid who married into the family for luck. I know how to find food in the wild, Lila said, ignoring his insult. I know how to build a warm shelter, and I know that if we split up, we'll all die. But if we work together, we can make it through the winter. Cale stepped beside her. She's right, he said. His voice was calm, but there was an authority in it that made everyone quiet down. Lila will lead the women and children to gather firewood and look for edible plants. The men will hunt and build stronger shelters. We'll share everything we find equally. No one dared to argue with Cale. Even in exile, he still had the aura of a leader, so they divided into groups and set to work. Leela was true to her word. She had learned to survive in the wild from her mother, and those skills now became their lifeline. She showed the women how to identify edible moss and lichen hidden under the snow, and where to find frozen berries that could be thawed and eaten. She taught them how to weave grass and animal fur into warm mats for the tents, and how to dig deep holes in the snow to store meat, keeping it frozen and fresh. She even showed them how to melt ice for clean water without wasting too much firewood. The children followed her around like little shadows, their cheeks red with cold but their eyes bright, calling her Aunt Leela and helping her gather firewood and berries. Mara, Milo's mother, became her right hand, helping her care for the sick and organize the women's work. Cale and the men were successful in their hunts, thanks in part to Cale's leadership. He had clearly been trained in combat and survival, guiding the men to set traps for wild rabbits and deer, and even leading a group to take down a bear that had wandered near the camp. The meat was a godsend, and Lila taught them how to cook it properly over a low fire to avoid burning, and how to use every part of the animal: hides for clothes and blankets, bones for tools and needles, fat for lighting lamps. Cale and the men were successful in their hunts. They caught wild rabbits, deer, and even a bear. Lila taught them how to cook the meat properly to avoid illness, and how to use every part of the animal: hides for clothes, bones for tools. As the days passed, the exiles' camp became more and more organized. They built sturdy log cabins with thatched roofs, stored enough food for the winter, and even made warm clothes from animal hides. The tension between them faded, replaced by a sense of community. They no longer saw Lila as an outsider. They saw her as their savior. Lila and Cale moved into a small cabin together. They still didn't talk much, but there was a quiet understanding between them. Cale would often leave early in the morning to hunt or check the perimeter of the camp, and return late at night, covered in snow. Lila would leave a warm meal for him by the fire and mend his clothes while he slept. One night, as the wind howled outside their cabin, Cale came back long after dark, his face pale and his left arm bleeding heavily from a deep gash. Lila didn't ask what had happened. She could see the faint tracks of a wolf in the snow on his boots, and she knew he had likely fought it off to protect the camp. She fetched her herb pouch and a basin of warm water, gently cleaning the wound with a cloth soaked in alcohol, stolen from the guards before they left. Cale winced slightly but didn't make a sound, watching her as she worked, his dark eyes softening in the firelight. She applied a paste of comfrey and calendula to promote healing, then wrapped the wound tightly with a clean strip of linen. "Why did you agree to marry me?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. "Why did you agree to marry me?" he asked suddenly. Lila paused, then looked up at him. "I wanted to be free," she said honestly. "I was a maid in the Voss family. I had no future, no choice. Marrying you and coming here, it was the first time I got to choose my own life." Cale was silent for a moment. "You could have chosen a better life," he said. "Maybe," Leela said with a small smile. "But this life isn't so bad. I have a roof over my head, food to eat, and people who need me. That's more than I ever had before." Cale reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was warm, gentle. Lila's heart skipped a beat. For the first time, she felt a spark of something between them, something more than just a forced marriage. Winter came and went. The snow melted, and the wastelands bloomed with small hardy flowers. Lila planted vegetables in a small garden outside their cabin, and the exiles started raising chickens and goats. They even traded furs and herbs with a nearby village, earning a little money to buy things they needed. Lila's life was simple, but it was happy. She had friends, a home, and a husband who, though quiet, cared for her. The only thing that bothered her was Cale's frequent absences. Sometimes he would be gone for days at a time, and when he came back, he would be tired and distant, as if he was carrying a heavy secret. But Lila didn't ask. She trusted him. Chapter 3. 3 Years of Peace. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. The exiles' settlement had grown into a small village, with neat log cabins, a well, and a communal barn. Lila had opened a small clinic in her cabin, treating the villagers' illnesses and injuries with her herbs. She was loved and respected by everyone. They called her Lady Lila, not because she was Cale's wife, but because of her kindness and skill. Cale's absences had become more frequent, but he always left her enough money and supplies to last while he was gone. He would also bring her small gifts when he returned, pretty stones, a piece of silk, or a rare herb she had mentioned wanting. Lila would keep these gifts in a small box by her bed and smile every time she looked at them. One morning, Lila was tending to her garden when a young girl ran up to her, breathless. Lady Lila, there's a stranger at the village gate. He says he's here to see you." Lila frowned. Strangers rarely came to their village. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the gate. There, standing in front of the wooden gate, was a man dressed in a fine silk robe, with a servant behind him carrying a large trunk. "Are you Lila Vorn?" the man asked, bowing slightly. "I am," Lila replied. "May I ask who you are?" "My name is Silas," the man said. "I am a merchant from the capital. I heard that you have a talent for healing, and I've come to ask for your help. My daughter is very ill, and the royal physicians can't cure her. I'll pay you handsomely if you can save her." Lila hesitated. She had never been to the capital, and she didn't want to leave the village, but the man's eyes were filled with desperation, and she couldn't refuse someone in need. "I'll go with you," she said, "but I need to tell my husband first." Silas looked relieved. "Thank you, Lady Lila. Thank you." Lila went back to her cabin and wrote a note for Cale, telling him where she had gone and that she would be back soon. She packed a small bag of clothes and her herbs, then followed Silas and his servant to their carriage. The journey to the capital took 5 days. Lila was amazed by the sights: tall stone walls, bustling markets, elegant palaces. She had never seen anything like it. When they arrived at Silas's mansion, she was taken to a small room where a young girl lay in bed, pale and weak, coughing violently. Lila examined the girl carefully. She recognized the symptoms immediately. It was a rare lung disease her mother had taught her to treat. She mixed up a potion with her herbs, then fed it to the girl with a spoon. "She'll be better in 3 days," Lila said to Silas. "Give her this potion twice a day, and make sure she gets plenty of rest and warm soup." Silas was overjoyed. He gave Lila a bag of gold coins, far more than she'd ever seen in her life. "Thank you, Lady Lila. You're a miracle worker." Lila thanked him, then decided to explore the capital for a little while before returning to the village. She walked through the markets, looking at the colorful fabrics, the delicious food, and the beautiful jewelry. She bought a small wooden doll for the children in the village and a new dress for herself, a light blue one with a simple pattern of flowers. Lila thanked him, then decided to explore the capital for a little while before returning to the village. She walked through the bustling markets, her eyes wide with wonder at the colorful fabrics, the piles of fresh fruit, and the stalls selling beautiful jewelry and handcrafted toys. She bought a small wooden doll with painted hair for Milo, and a new dress for herself, a light blue one with a simple pattern of daisies stitched along the hem, using some of the gold Silas had given her. As she wandered, she couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the wealthy nobles in their silk robes and the poor beggars huddled in the alleyways, shivering with cold and begging for food. It reminded her of the Voss mansion, where she had lived in comfort while the servants struggled, and it made her heart ache. As she was walking back to Silas's mansion, she heard a commotion up ahead. A group of royal soldiers were pushing a thin, ragged man through the crowd, their boots kicking at his shins, their swords tapping against his back. The man was screaming. his voice hoarse with fear. Please, I didn't mean it. I was just saying the emperor's taxes are too high. Please, spare me. Stop, Leela shouted, without thinking, running forward to stand in front of the man. The soldiers stopped short, surprised by her boldness. What did he do? Why are you beating him? One of the soldiers, a burly man with a scar across his cheek, turned to her, sneering. Mind your own business, woman. This man is a traitor. He spoke out against His Majesty the Emperor. He deserves to be flogged, or worse. That doesn't give you the right to beat an unarmed man, Lila said, her voice steady despite her fear. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, some curious, some fearful. He's defenseless. If he's guilty, let him stand trial, not be tortured in the street. The soldier's face turned red with anger. He raised his sword, the metal glinting in the sun. You want to defend a traitor? Then you can suffer with him. Stop, Lila shouted, running forward. What did he do? Why are you beating him? One of the soldiers turned to her, sneering. Mind your own business, woman. This man is a traitor. He spoke out against the emperor. That doesn't give you the right to beat him, Lila said, standing in front of the man. He's defenseless. The soldier raised his sword, ready to strike Lila. But before he could, a voice boomed from behind them. Put down your sword. The soldier froze. He turned around, then fell to his knees, trembling. Your Highness, forgive me. Lila looked up. Standing there was a man dressed in a golden crown and a red royal robe. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a stern face. But there was something familiar about him, something in his eyes. The man looked at Lila, his eyes widening slightly. Who are you? He asked. I'm Leela Vorn, she replied, confused. I'm just a healer from the northern wastelands. The man was silent for a moment, then nodded. Release the prisoner, he said to the soldiers. And never let me see you beating an unarmed man again. Yes, Your Highness, the soldiers said, scurrying away. The man turned back to Lila. Thank you for standing up for him, he said. Not many people have the courage to do that. It was the right thing to do, Lila said. No one deserves to be treated like that. The man smiled slightly. I am Emperor Alden. If you ever need anything, come to the palace and ask for me. Lila was shocked. She had just spoken to the emperor. She bowed deeply. Thank you, Your Majesty. The emperor nodded, then walked away with his entourage. Lila stood there, still in shock, before turning back to Silas's mansion. She decided to leave the capital the next day. She missed her village, and she missed Kale. When she returned to the village, she was greeted with cheers. The villagers had been worried about her. Kale had come back while she was gone and had been pacing anxiously around their cabin, waiting for her. As soon as he saw her, he ran forward and pulled her into his arms. Lila, you're back! I was so worried. Lila was surprised by his affection. He had never hugged her before. She hugged him back, feeling warm and safe. I'm sorry I worried you. I went to the capital to heal a girl, and I met the emperor. Kale's body tensed. You met the emperor? He asked, his voice low. Yes, Leela said. He was very kind. He stopped some soldiers from beating a man. Kale said nothing. He just held her tighter, as if he was afraid she would slip away. Lila didn't understand why he was so upset, but she didn't ask. She just leaned against his chest, enjoying the warmth of his embrace. Chapter 4. The Knock on the Door. A month later, Lila was sitting by the fire, mending Kale's coat, when she heard a loud knock on the door. It was not the gentle knock of a villager. It was a heavy, authoritative knock, followed by a shout. Open up! By order of the emperor! Lila frowned. She stood up and walked to the door, hesitating for a moment before opening it. Outside, the sun was shining, but the sight in front of her made her blood run cold. Hundreds of soldiers stood in formation, their armor glinting in the sun, their swords drawn. They were kneeling on one knee, their heads bowed. In front of them stood a man in a royal robe, one of the emperor's advisors. He looked at Lila, then fell to his knees as well, his voice booming. We greet Her Majesty the Queen. Please return to the palace with us. Leela froze. Queen? Her? That couldn't be right. I think you've made a mistake, she said, her voice trembling. I'm not the queen. I'm just Leela Vorn, a healer from the village. No mistake, Your Majesty, the advisor said. You are Leela Vorn, the wife of Kale Vorn, who is not just a traitor's son, but the rightful heir to the throne, Prince Kale Alden. Leela's eyes widened. Prince Kale, the rightful heir? She turned around, and there, Standing in the doorway of their cabin was Kale. But he was not the quiet, exiled man she had married. He was wearing a golden crown and a red royal robe, his dark eyes sharp and authoritative. He looked like the emperor. No, he looked like a king. Kale, Lila whispered, unable to believe her eyes. Kale walked forward and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth, Lila," he said. "I had to keep my identity a secret to protect you. My uncle, Emperor Alden, accused my family of treason and exiled us to take the throne for himself. For 3 years, I've been gathering an army and planning my return. Now the time has come." Lila stared at him, her mind racing. All those absences, all those secrets, he had been preparing to take back the throne. And she, a former maid, had unknowingly married a prince. "But why me?" she asked. "Why did you let me marry you?" Kale smiled softly. "Because from the moment I met you, I knew you were different. You were kind, brave, and selfless. You didn't care about my title or my family. You just cared about the people around you. When you agreed to marry me, you saved me. You gave me hope in the darkest time of my life." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Lila, you are my wife, and you will be my queen. I want to rule this kingdom with you by my side." The soldiers cheered, their voices echoing through the village. The villagers came out of their cabins, staring in awe at Kale and Lila. They had never known their quiet neighbor was a prince. Lila looked at Kale, then at the soldiers, then at the villagers who had become her family. She took a deep breath. This was not the simple life she had imagined, but it was a life with purpose, a life with him. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice steady. "I'll be your queen." Kale's eyes lit up. He lifted her into his arms, spinning her around. The soldiers cheered again, throwing their helmets into the air. Lila laughed, feeling happy and alive. They climbed into a golden carriage pulled by 4 white horses. As the carriage rolled away from the village, Lila looked out the window, waving goodbye to the villagers. They waved back, cheering and shouting her name. "What will happen to the village?" Lila asked Kale. "I'll make sure they're taken care of," Kale said. "I'll build them a school, a hospital, and a market. They'll never have to suffer again." Lila nodded. She knew he would keep his promise. She leaned against his shoulder, watching the scenery pass by. The wastelands were behind her, and a new future was ahead, one as a queen by her husband's side. Chapter 5: The Queen's Reign. When they arrived at the capital, the people lined the streets, cheering and waving. They had heard the truth about Emperor Alden's betrayal and were eager to welcome their rightful king and queen. Emperor Alden tried to resist, but his army was no match for Kale's. Within 3 days, the palace was taken and Alden was arrested. Kale stood before the people in the palace square holding Lila's hand. "Today we take back our kingdom," he said. "And today we start a new era, an era of justice, equality, and peace. My wife, Queen Lila, will rule by my side. She is a healer, a leader, and a woman of great kindness. She will help me make this kingdom a better place for all of us." The people cheered, throwing flowers at their feet. Lila smiled, feeling the warmth of their love and support. But not everyone was happy about Lila's ascension. The old noble families, who had grown rich and powerful under Alden's rule, looked down on her, whispering behind her back that she was a common maid and unfit to wear the queen's crown. They plotted against her, spreading vicious rumors that she was a witch who had bewitched Kale with dark magic and that she planned to steal the kingdom's wealth for herself. Some even went so far as to refuse to attend the royal banquets, hoping to undermine her authority. One crisp autumn morning, Lila was walking through the palace gardens, admiring the chrysanthemums in bloom, when a figure stepped out from behind a marble fountain, blocking her path. It was Lady Voss, Alara's mother, dressed in a rich purple gown trimmed with ermine, her nose turned up in disdain. One day, Lila was walking through the palace gardens when a noblewoman stepped in front of her. It was Lady Alara's mother, Lady Voss. "Lila," Lady Voss said, her voice cold, "you think you can just waltz into the palace and become queen? You're nothing but a common maid. You don't belong here." Lila looked at her, calm and composed, her hands folded in front of her. She had come a long way from the timid maid who had cowered in the Voss mansion's corners. "I belong here because Kale loves me, and because the people support me," she said, her voice clear and strong enough for the nearby gardeners to hear. "I may have been a maid once, but that does not make me less worthy. In the past month alone, I have opened 3 clinics for the poor, where anyone can receive free medicine and treatment. I have built 2 schools for the children of farmers and merchants, so they can learn to read and write. I have worked with the farmers to introduce new crop rotation techniques, so they will have more food to eat. What have you done, Lady Voss? You have spent your life sitting in your mansion, looking down on those less fortunate than you, and now you plot against me because I have risen above my station. You are the one who does not belong here, not me." Lady Voss's face turned red with anger. "You insolent girl, I'll have you thrown out of the palace." "You can try," Lila said, "but I doubt the king will let you. And if you continue to spread rumors about me, I'll have you arrested for treason." Lady Voss stepped back, shocked by Lila's courage. She had never seen this side of her before. She turned and walked away, humiliated. Word of the encounter spread through the palace. The nobles realized that Lila was not a weak, timid maid. She was a strong, intelligent queen who would not be bullied. They stopped plotting against her and started to respect her. Lila did not let the nobles' cruelty stop her. She continued to work tirelessly for the people, traveling to villages across the kingdom to listen to their needs. She opened more clinics and schools, improved the roads and bridges so merchants could trade more easily, and established a system of fair taxes that relieved the burden on the poor. She even created a council of commoners, farmers, merchants, and artisans to advise her and Kale on matters of state, ensuring that the voices of all people were heard. Kale supported her every step of the way, admiring her courage and compassion, and together they reformed the laws, banning the harsh punishments Alden had used, and ensuring that everyone, no matter their station, was treated fairly. The kingdom prospered under their rule. Crops grew plentiful, trade flourished, and the people lived in peace. The nobles, seeing how beloved Lila was and how successful the kingdom had become, finally put aside their prejudices, realizing that her background did not matter, only her wisdom and kindness. They began to attend the royal banquets, bowing respectfully to her, and even asked for her advice on matters of family and business. One day, Kale took Lila to the top of the palace tower, where they could see the entire capital. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Look at what we've built," Kale said, putting his arm around her. "All of this is ours. All of this is ours to protect." "It's beautiful," Lila said, leaning against him, "but I never thought I'd end up here. I just wanted a simple life." "This is a simple life," Kale said. "A life with purpose, with love, with happiness. Isn't that what you wanted?" Lila smiled. "Yes," she said. "This is exactly what I wanted." Kale leaned down and kissed her softly at first, then more deeply. The wind blew through their hair, carrying the scent of flowers from the garden below. For a moment, there was no king or queen, just 2 people in love, staring out at the kingdom they had built together. Years later, Lila and Kale had 2 children, a son and a daughter. They raised them to be kind and compassionate, teaching them to care for the people. The kingdom continued to prosper, and Lila was remembered as one of the greatest queens in history, a former maid who had risen to become a leader, a healer, and a symbol of hope. And sometimes, when Lila was sitting in the palace gardens, drinking tea and watching her children play, she would think back to that day in the Voss mansion, when she had made the choice to marry Kale and go into exile. It had been the best choice she had ever made. She had gone from being an outcast to a queen, from a nobody to someone who was loved and respected by millions. And she knew that none of it would have been possible without Kale, her husband, her king, her everything. As the sun set on the palace, Lila smiled. Her life was not the one she had imagined, but it was the perfect one.